Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 208th New Social Environment. I'm Louis Block, the production editor at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Sarah Crowner and Tom McGlynn. We're also thrilled to have the poet Aries Kirby here, who will read to close today's program. To begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McCatty, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salah, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country. And we acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability, and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce our host and guest, we'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. Now to introduce today's guest and host. Sarah Crowner was born in Philadelphia in 1974. She earned a BA from the University of California, Santa Cruz in 1996, and an MFA from Hunter College in 2002. In her search for a mode of image making that accommodates immediacy and spontaneity, Crowner creates dynamic compositions that test the boundaries of abstract painting while also engaging in reshaping its art historical legacy. Her current show at Casey Kaplan Gallery is up until January 16th. Tom McGlynn is an artist and writer based in the New York City area. His work is represented in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum of the Smithsonian, among other national and international collections. He is an editor-at-large at the Rail, contributing articles and criticism since 2012. His most recent show of paintings opened in February of last year at Rick Wester Fine Art in New York City. He currently maintains a studio at the Sharp Relentless Studio Program in Brooklyn, where he was awarded a 2019-2020 residency. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Louis. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk with Sarah about her extraordinary work. I first became familiar with Sarah's work at a discussion, I think it was with Sam Moyer and Julia Rommel at the Flag Art Foundation a couple of years back. And so an opportunity to get into her work in more depth was welcome. We're going to do like a brief prelude and talk a little bit about Sarah's earlier development, and then primarily talk about her current show, which is up at Casey Kaplan. And I think it's up till the 16th, Sarah?
That's right.
So Louis, if you can initiate the discussion with the image of the vessels, and maybe I'll hand it off to Sarah. And
yeah. So shall we talk about this project that I did before we get into the paintings then?
Well, you know, when we had a discussion, I was fascinated by the fact that you were talking about your development being influenced by what you called art adjacent influences, not necessarily painting.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wouldn't mind, if you can recapitulate that in like a shorter form. I thought it was fascinating because everybody comes at painting from a different angle, and there's aspects of your painting which are conceptual from my point of view.
Yeah. And
I think that those earlier influences might illuminate that.
Yeah. So I graduated from art school in 2002 at Hunter, and I was trying to paint that whole time and having a hard time kind of finding my voice or finding meaning in painting. And I kind of finished grad school, and I had a studio in New York City, and I had several jobs, tried to paint at night. struggled with it and still couldn't find meaning, and became very frustrated with the medium of painting and maybe the slowness of it. And I was missing a kind of tactility. And I said, I'm going to put that aside for now, and I'm going to try a new medium. Something I'd never done before was ceramics and working with clay. I'd never really tried it before. And then Hunter College offered me a ceramics residency. And this is around 2006, 7, so on like that. And I had this idea, and at the same time, I was going to the library a lot. I was looking a lot at art history, going to the MoMA library, because I found out that not only academics and scholars are allowed in a library like that, but actual regular people, artists are allowed in there. You just have to ask permission. And I went in there and I discovered all these great old art magazines from the 1920s that I could literally put my hands on, and I could photocopy and scan, and I found old catalogs, and I was just trying to figure out what I was doing with my art practice. And I learned about the artist Beatrice Wood, who was a ceramist, and also I found out she was part of the Dada scene in New York. She moved to California. She lived in a small town, the same town I kind of grew up in as a child, Ojai. And but what was interesting to me about her was not her work, but her biography. And so I read her autobiography, which discusses all of her friends and lovers who she knew throughout her life and who influenced her. So it was kind of about love and influence and inspiration. And so I decided, as a project, as a way of getting my hands dirty and sort of getting away from painting, but thinking about medium, I would use her medium, which was clay, and create these anthropomorphic portraits of her friends and lovers. So each one is, let's say she knew Marcel Duchamp, she knew Picabia, she was friends with Brancusi, she knew the composer Edgar Varese, and then when she moved to California, she followed Krishnamurti, the Theosophan and teacher. And so it was just kind of like this idea of creating her life through her medium in a medium that was new to me. So a medium as a way to get to the ghosts, if you want to talk about ghosts, but also for me to learn and figure out what I was doing. So I made this project. I presented it in a gallery in Berlin in 2008. And you can show the next slide, which shows, if you see another picture. Yes, so the other thing that I decided was that these vessels would be hollow and bottomless. So they weren't useful. They didn't have any function. You couldn't pour water in them. They have no bottom. So they really are shells or ghosts. That got me started. That started me thinking about how to get back into painting again. And so thinking about this intersection of craft and the handmade with modernism or history, using a medium a specific medium to learn something, and as an artist, and to learn how to create meaning, led me into painting. And then I had this idea of an interesting way to paint would be to take apart compositions and paint them and sew them back together again, which led me to the kind of the way that I've been working for the last 10 years or so. So this is just to show how the ceramics kind of led into painting, my painting practice, and finally gave me meaning again with painting.
And that term that you mentioned, which is wonderful, which became a title of one of your shows, plastic memory.
Yeah.
That's the memory of the handprint of, if I remember right, of the potter on the pot, and
yeah.
how it has kind of like a springiness, or.
Yeah. So now I mean, even now I do a lot of pottery on the wheel. We have a ceramic studio downstairs, the studio where I work now. And these were hand built. They're made with this kind of coil technique, and you can see the fingerprints, but now I'm doing pottery on the wheel. And even if you lift up the wet finished pot off of the wheel, your thumb you make a thumbprint in it. Even if you smooth it out after you fire the pot, the fingerprint comes back. It's like the material, the medium has a memory. So as much as you think you can smooth it out and make it perfect, there's always this print of the hand on it, which I love. And that's called plastic memory.
I love that combination of like the neurological and the phenomenological. And I think it has relevance to your whole approach to your painting, like currently too. It's a poetic, I love that poetic combination of plastic and memory, because one is sometimes often seen as abstract, right? Or
Right.
insubstantial, right?
Mm-hmm. But also, like I think in Europe they call it the plastic arts. They don't, les arts plasticiens, for example. We don't use that word plastic arts here so much in the United States, I don't think. But I like the kind of the meaning, the more scientific meaning of the plasticity of the moldable, not the formal kind of art, the plastic arts, which would be painting and sculpture.
Right, and it's also a term of, it's like a neurological term of synaptic behavior, So it's how synapses kind of like, they fire and accommodate and information. So that, so yeah, whatever. But maybe we can move to that painting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just describe, and this is, I just want to say this is a project that I really worked on for about a year or two, not more. So it was for me, this series was kind of a bridge from thinking about this idea of craft and art history, craft and modernism, and moving into sort of what I'm doing now, which is very different. So this series here was kind of a bridge. As I said, like, whereas I think that artists learn by making, or at least the kind of artist that I am, I learn by doing things with my working with my hands, and not so much studying or not so much writing or reading, but really making as a way of learning. That's an old kind of Bauhaus model, I suppose, but
also Dewey. Right.
Learning by doing. Yeah, it's pretty obvious, I guess. But so this painting is from 2009, and it's called Superficie Modulada 1956. And it's after a Leisha Clark painting. And so she made a painting in 1956. This is before she got into the more movable sculptures and the more installation work. She was doing these kind of hard-edged geometric abstract paintings in Brazil in the 50s, part of the neo-concrete movement that we all know. And she made a very large, wide painting in pinks and greens and blacks and grayscale of sort of these kind of like overlapping shapes that seem to be folded and so on. And it was made with like industrial paint, I think enamel type of paint on aluminum, very flat. And as I was saying, I was going to the MoMA library all the time, and like I was really interested in hard-edged geometric abstraction and all the different and all the different periods of the 20th century when artists were using a hard edge, a hard line, and why often it seems so simple, but actually it's one of the hardest things to create. And also there's so many different reasonings and meaning behind each of these types of paintings. So I set myself on this kind of research project, and I was fascinated by this moment and this painting, and especially this fragment of this larger painting. So what I did is I Xeroxed it, I cropped it, I blew it up to a larger scale. I made a pattern using pattern paper, and I treated each part of this painting as I took them apart, I painted them, and then I stitched them together with an industrial sewing machine, and then restretched the painting on a larger, this is probably 5 or 6 feet high. So it's made out of, 12 or so different parts stitched together. So all those hard-edged are sewn line. And it was for me like learning about this painting that I loved and trying to kind of take it apart and figure out what makes it tick, and then put it back together again in a different language and see what happens. And so it came out of this impulse of wanting to understand, and it also came out of an impulse of love and appreciation, less critique. I would say. And then it becomes an object now, right? It's no longer her painting. It's no longer a Xerox of her painting. It's an object that is that many times removed. And so that's why I titled it after her title, Superficie Modulata. And then I made a whole series of paintings, really directly looking at particular specific art historical, paintings from the past, let's say. And this is one
Sarah,
of them.
do you know what the translation of the title is?
Modulating superficie means a surface.
Modulating surface.
Surface, modulating surface. Yeah.
That's interesting because we did get into a discussion of the modular.
Modality. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So was this the first sewn painting you did?
Yeah, it was.
So that was a leap. That was quite a leap.
It was a leap. Well, I saw it as an experiment. I just wanted to see what would happen if I did it. I didn't know you could paint canvas and then stick it through a sewing machine. Of course you can do it. Now I know you can totally do that. But at the time I thought that's crazy. And then to make something so complex, it's not just one sewn line. Now I'm doing curves that are very complex, but it was just sort of an experiment to see if that was possible, and it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see with the reproduction, but I mean, they're very physical, And it's also, we talked about this too, you kind of solve the problem of the conceit of the taped line, right? Because a lot of hard-edged, particularly like in the 60s, were taped, the paintings were taped. And that has a certain feel to it. But by sewing it, you've kind of you solved that whole problem.
And it's really about, for me, it was really about, I was thinking about, I'm pretty pragmatic, I suppose, like in my studio. What's the smartest way to join two bodies of color together using the materials of a painter? Because this is about the history of painting, and I'm a painter. How do you join two bodies of color together? I mean, I guess the most straightforward, practical way would be, for me, to stitch it, right? Then I'm thinking of the painting in parts and sections, and I'm not just thinking about it as a flat image. It's a collection of tectonic plates, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, those are modes too. I mean, the fragments could be seen as like kind of a modular, thing. Maybe we can go to the next painting. This gets into your ceramic work in terms of installation, Sarah.
Yeah, so this is a nice picture because on the one with the picture on the right, you can see the backs of two of the paintings. So here I wanted to create, so you can see the seams on the back. And so here I wanted to create an environment. And as I'd been, making for a few years at that point, I've been making these kind of sewn paintings. And I was really interested in the way that viewers experience the paintings, right? Like, so we're all looking at them on a screen and they feel very flat. And if you didn't hear me talking about them, you might think it's just a painted line. But when you're in a gallery or you're in a museum or you're in my studio, there's this moment that happens between when you are seeing the painting from far away and then as your body moves closer, 5 feet, 3 feet, however well you can see, you notice there's this moment where you notice that it's not an image anymore and it's an object. And so I was really interested in the importance of the body and the viewer's body as it relates to my paintings. And so thinking about the body in that sense and thinking about movement across a space, it made me think about making a painting that you could walk on and making a painting that you could stand on and dance on and run across and lie down on, something really functional. And I thought, how would I do that? Would I make a painting that people walk on and just let it get dirty? Or would it be a rug? Would I paint on the floor? How do I really make that environment? And then I thought, again, being pragmatic, then I thought that that tiles are a kind of a form of painting. These kind of handmade terracotta tiles, they're made with a friend's factory in Mexico. They're all different. They all have different glaze sort of irregularities in them. Each of them are cut by hand, so none of the edges are perfectly straight. And if you put them all together, suddenly you have hard edge, you have color, you have gesture, and it's another way of thinking about painting. So I love that this is like using a technique of the architect or a technique of the tile maker, the tile setter. You're thinking about painting too, in the same way that the paintings make you think of the technique of a tailor or a quilter. This makes you think of architecture, but I'm still, in my mind, calling it both a different form of painting.
And was this Jorge Pardo's factory?
This is, Jorge has worked in that factory before, yeah.
Because it reminds me, you know, the first time I've seen it deployed in such a kind of environmental way was a while ago. The old Dia art space in Chelsea had an installation of his ceramic. It was like a room, you know, of his ceramics. And I thought it was.
Yeah, I remember that. His work, the difference between that and this, there's a lot, is that he tiles the floor right to the edge, right? He's more talking about interiors, interior design. He's talking about design a lot. And what I'm talking about here is about painting. And the reason, hopefully you notice that there's this edge around the entire terracotta floor and it's raised like a platform. You notice the edge, it makes you think that it's movable and temporary and portable in the same way that the paintings are portable. So they have a frame and it can be kind of collapsed, and not that it's so heavy it could not be collapsed so easily, but the idea is that it's a discrete thing. It's not melding into its environment.
Right, it's more provisional, contingent, perhaps. I think, you know, I think the thing that it also raises in relation to Pardo, it's, you know, I'm not making a correlation, but this whole idea where minimal hard edge abstraction would be considered decor, you know, there's a camp that would say that, you know, that, and I think for me, like when I see this installation, it's a complete refutation of that whole idea. You know, it's a complete refutation of merely decor, and it has a conceptual rigor to it that remains contingent in like the viewer's perception, you know, conceptual perception, but it's very physical. So you can't really avoid it in terms of like you're literally walking on it.
Right. Right. And I was also really interested in not just the visual aspects of painting, but the way that it feels. So I was interested in people who walked over the tile platform in their high heels and the sound that it would make on the glassy tile floor. I'm interested in the coldness of it, and how that interacted with the very soft, velvety, absorbent feeling of the painting. So I was interested in the feeling of it, not just the look of it.
Again, the plastic memory, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I think maybe at this point, Louis, can we take a look at that Sophie Tauber art painting? Now, I know that this was one of those paintings that in one of your early shows was part of an influence. I just wanted to start to introduce this idea of like, since we're going to be looking at your paintings later, like how you work with composition, and how that there is a certain kind of modal order. There's like an ordering of form in a lot of your paintings that reflects how Sophie Tauber Arp is doing this in Echelonnement des Sexes.
Love this painting. I think it means Echelonnement means spaced out. I like the double meaning of spaced out.
I also saw like in definition that it was like, it has stage in the name. It was, I can't find it here, but there was literally the word stage in the name, so that it had a correlation with like your staging, you know.
Yeah. Well, if you look at this painting and you pull out one of the blue curves, it's kind of like, okay, take out one of those blue curves. And if you go to the Mass Mocha picture, Lewis, you can see what happened here. I was interested in one or two of those curves. I was just obsessed with that painting and I looked at it so much. I pulled out a couple of those curves and I repeated them and rotated them 90 degrees so that they look like stems. This painting is called stretched stems, rotated stretched stems, I think. And they also look like the blue shapes look like drips, like paint dripping downward. And I also like this, so that's where the formal aspects of this painting came from, but really like, it's not so much about that. That was just kind of like a place that was something that inspired me, but it was really about the relationship of the painting to the floor as it was in the other slide that we saw in the wave installation.
Right.
And I wanted to really think of a backdrop, a painting as a backdrop, and a floor, like a tile floor, as a stage. And so we commissioned a dancer and a sound artist, James Hoff and Carolyn Schurner, to do a performance there. I think you have a picture of that too, right, Lewis? Yeah, it's called Post Tree. And I wanted to see, this leads into my interest in performance. And I wanted, just thinking about, all these interests that I have in the body and in the materiality of painting and the material side of the stage and movement, I wanted to think about this backdrop, this painting as a literal backdrop. So we organized this performance. It was about 25 minutes long. And I wanted to see how you felt as a viewer looking at a painting while you have this beautiful form of a dancer in red moving around the painting and dancing on this kind of, and these are concrete cement tiles. What that does to the painting, does that animate the painting, or does the stillness of the painting quiet the dancer? Like this relationship with time.
Right.
Was something, I really see this as, even though it's a museum show, I see it as an experiment in like the possibilities of painting over time and duration, and thinking of those kind of questions, like what does
I'm glad
she
you mentioned
do
time, because like when I put together the slides for Lewis, I subtitled it "The Time of Shape."
Oh,
Inverting that,
yeah.
That famous book. Like there is an impulse in your work to give time to shape.
What do you mean by that a little bit more? Can you
Well, just like you just explained, yeah, the Kubler book. That you're creating this. These are situations. You're creating these situations. They're environmental. They're time based, and you're putting your paintings in these situations that engage them as opposed to like them being reticent on the museum wall as individual discrete artworks. They become environmental, and so the environment lends time to the paintings. But the paintings themselves too, in terms of their sequencing, also are their time. They look like they're sequenced. Like a time, like an animation might be.
Yeah, I think this was really interesting for me to see, and I've done a few things like this. I made a backdrop, and I that went to different museums and different theatrical venues. I like this idea that I could make a painting. It was unstretched, roll it up and send it from site to site, and then unfurl it, and a different activity happens in front of the curtain or the backdrop. And how does that change the painting? How does that change the meaning of the painting? Does it, what is that relationship? And no, it's been super, super interesting. I like this idea that like a movement, and she was moving pretty fast, can actually slow you down. When you're thinking about it, it can sort of like slow you down, slow down the reception of the work. I mean, often we go to galleries and we breeze through a gallery in 5 minutes maybe, and we think we've seen the show or we understand the work. And in fact, like what happens if you're sitting there and, you know, we could talk about the ballet collaboration I did as well, but what if you're sitting there for 45 minutes in a chair, you can't move.
Right.
And there's so much else going on. I mean, I just don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just know I'm interested in these questions of painting's purpose and what's the point, and where does it live? Where can it live?
Well, it seems to me like you're offering more time to like a concept of viewing paintings or painting in an expanded field. You're offering more conceptual time to the perception of painting as just, you know, like a discrete object.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Where would you like to go from here, Sarah?
What's next in line? Yeah, we could talk about this. So I was invited to do a collaboration with a choreographer named Jessica Lang in 2018, and she's a young choreographer. She works with ballet a lot, and she's done a lot with ABT. And she created a brand new composition, and she wanted me to create sets and costumes for this collaboration. And that was an incredible experience. That was at Lincoln Center in October 2018. It was called Garden Blue. And she approached me knowing a little bit about my work, but asking me to create a set without having choreographed or created her choreography, her dance yet. So she started with my idea, and then she kind of filled it in with all her hard work and with these incredible dancers. And so if we go to the next view, I started by making a number of sketches and collages of a kind of a color palette or what I wanted the backdrop to look like. We went through many ideas of sort of what kind of props could exist. So it consisted of a 40 by 46 foot painted backdrop. So that's what you see in the picture of Jessica and I talking over in the audience over there. And then there were 3 lightweight wooden wings, I call them. And they're kind of based on the form of a seed pod, those kind of twirling helicopter pods that fall from trees. And there were 3 of them, and they were movable. So the dancers were able to interact with them. If you go to the image before, you can see one manifestation of them. I wish we could show a video, but we don't really have time. But the idea was me to create, I mean, what I was thinking is I'm just going to create an abstract painting that's 3-dimensional. And all I knew was that the music was going to be Dvorak, and it was 25 minutes. And so I really began thinking about my palette and kind of like colors that I've used, and especially that hot fluorescent violet color and those hot reds. And so they became kind of like these blossoms sort of jumping around in a landscape. And it was beautiful.
Do you know what Dvorak piece it was?
The Dumky Trio.
Okay.
Dumky.
Maybe we can, Louis, maybe we can take a look at, this may seem like a lateral segue, but maybe we could take a look at the Ellsworth Kelly notebooks. So I know that these were an influence on you, Sarah, that you mentioned.
Yeah, I also, yeah, it's kind of a different topic, but I guess everything's related, right? So I actually pulled out the book because you can see how dirty and old it is, because I look at it almost every day and all these Post-it notes. And I pulled out this, that's a great page that you picked, but do you see this one that has the squashed ice cream cone or coffee cup, whatever it is down there? Do you see the
Yeah, it
blue
looks like one of those ice,
yeah, like snow.
Yeah, ice cones. Yeah.
So I love this book so much, and you know, I was thinking a lot. I'm always thinking about Ellsworth Kelly, but when I saw this show at the Drawing Center in 2002, it blew my mind. It showed me that, wow, like what I thought about Kelly, it was all wrong. I thought he was a formalist. I thought he was a purist. I thought there was something reverent and holy about his work, the perfection of the curve, the perfect yellow field. And then I realized that all or most or many of his compositions, I don't know exactly, come from daily life and chance, really. And so that snow cone, squashed snow cone piece of cardboard, whatever, you can just picture him walking down the street and seeing it on the street and picking it up and being like, hey, that's a great curve. I like that curve. I'm going to draw that curve. And then that somehow would lead into this, so let's say a painting of a triangle with one curved edge. And just the way that I would say something that appears so holy and pure comes from the street was something that I totally identify with. As artists, I think a lot of us sort of like walk down the street and notice things, right? And it's, you know, I think that's just as big of a part of my art practice as sitting in my studio painting, right? It's like noticing things around you and in daily life.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interject this, you know, after we're talking about the dance, but I thought I just want to get it in there because,
yeah,
you know, the whole argument of like formalism and where it comes from and the purity, and we've talked about the impurity of abstract form, that it doesn't necessarily have to follow that historical arc.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it comes from different places. I mean, I was thinking about the Russian constructivists, and I was thinking about politics, and I was thinking about abstraction as revolution, you know, and that's one thing. And then I'm thinking about Kelly, and then I'm thinking about Leisha Clark or Ilya Watasika, and you know, so it comes from all over the place. And,
Yes, right.
and yeah, I mean, that's a really another subject.
Yes, but I think it is important. Yeah, I think it's important to talk about. Yeah,
no, and I just love this book so much.
Yeah.
I think it's super out of print, but I recommend every artist to look at it.
And where would you like to go next, Sarah?
What's next in the line of things? Yeah, and just like, yeah, circling back to the stage and the theater metaphor. So this that we've been talking about, and so my tile platforms have always been, they're always kind of raised, right? I think this is not tiled. This is just simply a smooth plywood. But I just wanted to talk about the height of it. I wanted to talk about the step up. And what happens when people step on stage, that kind of weird psychological place of like, I'm on stage now, I feel different. I don't know if I'm nervous. I don't know if I want to sing. I don't know what I want to do, but I feel different than I did 6 inches before when I was standing on the concrete floor. And it's not just a simple thing of, now I'm standing on a concrete floor and it's cold and it's hard. And now and then you step up and then you're on a smooth, hollow, bendable plywood floor. And now you feel soft. It's sort of this, there's this psychological shift. I think I did this in a gallery because I wanted people to feel different. I wanted people to enter into a different space, which is more active and less passive. And, I talked about often we go to run around in galleries in Chelsea, let's say, and we run in and out of a gallery in 5 minutes and we think we've got it. And we don't pay attention to our bodies. We don't pay attention to ourselves. We're just sort of like, view, I'm out. Or maybe I stay, and that's one thing. But what about this? Anyway, through the simplest means, I wanted to create this shift. And I think that by standing on this space, you do feel more active. You become a protagonist, maybe in some like imaginary theatrical situation. We don't have a lot of images of this installation, but you can kind of see the front of the stage is curved, and it's not a wide angle lens. It's not like warped or whatever, but in the back there's also cutouts. And so the cutouts that are in this kind of stage here, mimic very literally the curves in the painting. So I wanted to, like I did with the wave exhibition, I wanted to create a relationship between what's on the wall and what's on the floor, what your body feels as you move around the space with what you see on the painting. It's just, again, another way of me trying to kind of animate or like bring the painting back into the body and make you feel it in a way that's that you feel with your body and not just with your brain or your eyes.
Well, with regards to that recurring shape, the curve, and then, the curve kind of going to the hard, the cutoff, as it were. I was thinking of the term a foreshortened arabesque. So that you have the movement, but then there's a foreshortening, which is kind of a conceptual foreshortening, that it doesn't allow you to kind of just get lost in the arabesque. It stops you, and then it makes you consider the arabesque. It's like a jetty on the beach. It creates a resistance.
It's control. Yeah, it's control. It's controlling you, but it's also imagining. It makes you imagine, because it's a truncated or a cut or a chopped curve. It makes you imagine it's going to continue, and it's all part of a circle. So it kind of, there is this pointing to an endlessness or an openness, but it is at the same time honoring the architecture of the gallery and like respecting those lines. But then it also kind of directs you outside of it in a way. I guess that's hard. It's kind of hard to explain what I'm talking about, but
I don't think so. I think it's like in dialogue, the paintings are square, the room is square. It's in dialogue with the squareness of our environments.
Yeah. And also the paintings, I'm just noticing that too, as it relates to what you just said, the shapes of, you can see this because you can see the sides of the two paintings, the blue and the green one. You can see how the lines, the shapes kind of wrap around the sides.
Yes.
Of the painting. So that also, like, in a normal painting, whatever a normal painting is, the image is on the front. You don't really look at the sides. But with my work, this accentuates its objectness. It wraps around,
right,
the top to bottom.
And again, the objectness can't really be felt in these reproductions.
It's too bad. I should have put some details in the image selection, but well.
Louis, can we go to that Matisse? So this Matisse, The Bathers by the River, which is one of his paintings and considered like one of his most important transitional pieces. It has that kind of feeling of sequence, and it has that feeling of like the interrupted arabesque. And I chose it because I was thinking about, again, the time of shape, how you're bringing time and the phenomenology of time in an abstract sense, like in terms of the sequencing and the modality of your composition. So, and again, I talked about this Robert Motherwell. He inverts the dead and the alive with alive and dead. So he's also doing the same thing with time. So I think I just wanted to introduce those ideas in terms of abstract painting, because they're not necessarily considered all the time in terms of say the quantum level of how artists are thinking about the phenomena.
So when you talk about time as it relates to the Matisse, for example, are you talking about that in the composition or in the subject matter? Can you just describe a little bit?
Well, it's like a film strip,
Right, because of all the verticals.
And also how the figure is turning.
Right.
It's it's like those backs in the MoMA garden. I don't know if they're still there, but
yeah.
You're taking through a sequence of abstraction. So it's not like you're not thinking about, well, this is a reductive thing. You're really focused on the phenomenology of it.
Yeah, I love that painting. I love it for so
No,
many
it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite Matisses.
Yeah. But I think that was on view at MoMA recently, or at least this year, the year before, because I did see it recently. But
I think it's in Chicago.
Oh, really? I don't know. Then maybe I saw something else. but I love this use of verticals. Maybe we could go to the painting that's blue on blue in the gallery. It's my painting towards that one. Yeah.
This is the current show, just to.
This is the current show. Yeah. And so I was experimenting with a very new format, which is very horizontal and very horizontal, and sort of like, let's say that the size is 208 inches by 72 inches, something like that. So kind of like human height, but very wide. And I wanted to make a painting with these kind of strong verticals. And I was thinking about this kind of, the way of reading this, the way one could read this painting would be like a film strip, because it's so big. It's really hard to get that feeling because you're not standing in front of it. But if you walk into the gallery, you walk right up to it. It's really something that you read left to right. And this was very new to me. Also, the painting that's orange, that you had opened the show, that one. Yeah, it's the same scale and also has these strong verticals. Yeah, and I also like was going back to the idea of the backdrop as well with these, because of the scale. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's directly related to the Matisse, but this idea of the film strip for sure resonates with me.
You know, the thing about Matisse is he's so simple and direct, and there's so much work that could be directly, you know, genealogically connected to Matisse. It's not necessarily, you know.
Yeah.
These pieces have a lot of negative, like so-called negative space in them, as opposed to some of the other paintings.
We could talk about that too. Yeah, we could talk. So if you look at the purple painting, this purple painting here, and you just kind of look quickly at the shapes, the purple shapes or the violet shapes for a second, and then you remember them, and then you go to the Medusa painting, which is maybe that one. Yeah. So this also, it's hard to tell with scale, but this is 10 feet high by 8 feet wide, something like that. So quite large. And this is a very intricate painting. All those lines are sewn. I think there's 67 sections in this painting that were painted and sewn. So there's a lot. So basically there were a lot of leftover shapes in purple in this violet color that I paint the violet, I cut out the shapes, and then I have this mountain of these, negative shapes. That's what they are. And I don't throw things away, and I wasn't ready to recycle them. So I took those and I turned them into a new painting, which is a lot smaller, which is the one we just saw next to the orange painting. If you want to go back to that one. Yeah, so the way that I work, and maybe that needs to be described a little bit. So I would start with a Medusa painting. I have these leftover shapes. What I do is I work mostly on the floor. And so I'll lay out these large drop cloths on the studio floor, and I'll just sort of throw down shapes and arrange them. I work on my knees and I move them around and stand up and walk around. I'm not composing top to bottom, left to right, but just sort of like I walk around it all the time, and I keep moving them around, these shapes, and I think of it as like if you were moving paper and you were making a collage. And so finally I arrive at a composition that I like, that makes sense, or I think has potential, and then carefully the shapes get carefully pinned together, and then we sew them together using an industrial sewing machine, and then they get stretched around. So it's this process of there's a kind of a fast process, which is like the way you make a collage, very fast, very kind of instinctual, moving shapes around. And then there's a slowness that's next, and that's the pinning and the sewing. And then if I'll stretch it and it's on the wall, I might look at it and say, it's terrible, or it needs to go upside down, or it needs to be twice as large or twice as small. And then I'll take it off the stretcher bar and cut it up again, rearrange it, and keep working with it up to 6 or 7 times or whatever, until I arrive at the place that I can say that it's finished. So, we were talking a lot when you came to the gallery, Tom, about, velocity, or maybe that wasn't the word we used, but slowness and speed. And, we talked about that in terms of performance, but now I'm talking about it in terms of my process. And I think that's what's interesting to me, because with the two sides of the brain that I have, two ways of thinking, the logical and then the emotional, or the fast and the slow. I think these paintings kind of really come together. They really use both speeds somehow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that you're right. You know, you're kind of, you know, you're making peace with that divide, you know.
Yeah.
But can we take a look at that, the Gee's Bend quilt? Forgive me, you know, if I'm making too many references here, but I do think it's important. So here's a Gee's Bend, Gee's Bend quilt, an early Jack Youngerman and an Ellsworth Kelly. And I wanted to include the Gee's Bend quilt because it's fantastic for one thing, but also that we talked about how you use, you know, like chance is a big part of your process, and how you use like scraps, like you'll incorporate scraps into a painting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's, yeah. I mean, I would call them. I used to call them leftover pieces, but. And that's kind of what they are. They're kind of the negative shapes. That's literally what they are. And I like that element of chance, of sort of like, I cut out a positive. I don't really think or know what the negative is going to be like, but I know I want to keep it. That's what I know. I mean, so there is decision. It's not completely random. There is a decision that I want to keep that shape, but it's really a question of how they all fit together. And so that's where the surprise is. And there's also the surprise. I mean, chance and surprise are different things, but the surprise when it's sewn together, even then, I don't know really what the composition is going to look like until it's stretched and on the wall. I really can't decide or know until the very last minute. So I'm not sure. I don't know how the Gee's Bend quilters, how they work, if they're working from fabric scraps or if they're composing.
There is an idiom, there is a specific, you know, I think quilts, you know, there is a specific idiom in quilting where you are just using scraps.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I don't know. But all I know is that I do like this place between chance and composition. And like Kelly does that so well, going back to Kelly. Did you know that Jack Youngerman and Ellsworth Kelly were friends and they lived in Paris together in that period?
I think they also shared like a studio at Coenty.
Yeah. Yeah, I just found that out. Yeah, I never saw those collages of Youngerman though.
Yeah, when I was doing the research, I was like happy to find those because you know, they're seminal kind of collages for him.
His work got really kind of Baroque.
Yeah.
Later, but I really love it too.
Yeah, and let's go back to the show. I'm sorry.
Yeah, is there anything we should continue to talk about?
Well, I mean, you have all these fantastic paintings in the show. I think, yeah, why don't we take a look at that? This is the installation. And when I visited you during the show, at the gallery, I remarked on like that each painting has its own kind of, it has its own personality. Like, even though you're working in these modalities and the repetition of form, it was fascinating to me that each painting has its own kind of logic and phenomenology. And I know that the Medusa painting was somewhat influenced by your encounter with sculpture in Rome.
Yeah, I'm glad that you noticed that about them having different personalities so much, because one thing I hate, or I don't hate, but I don't love going into a gallery space and seeing every painting being exactly the same size. It just feels so like decided. And for me, the way that but just maybe I'm just working in a different way. For me, the way I work is I'll make the painting and then I'll decide the parameters after. I'll decide the scale after. Like I'll say, for example, that red and blue painting in the foreground, I really only, like I made it, it was much, much bigger, but I really only connected with or liked, I guess you could say, was drawn to the middle section. So I cut it out and I just made it a smaller painting. And the blue one that's so wide actually was a lot shorter, but I kept adding to it because I kept wanting to see more. So each painting kind of has its own personality. It has its own set of rules. It has its own color scheme. But the one in the back, yeah. And so, the one in the back, that's the Medusa. And that is the one painting, that was the first painting that I made for this show. And as you can see, the action is happening in the very center of the composition. And none of those little squirrely, snaky kind of white shapes wrap around the sides. They all are contained. And I thought I was gonna make a whole show of paintings with the action in the center. I like the way, I'm like very happy with this painting. I love how it worked, but this I made or like started making when I was in Rome this winter, before I had to move back to New York because of the pandemic. And when I got back to my studio in New York, I started working the way that I worked before in the past, which is compositions that wrap around the top and the bottom and the side. Anyway, this was inspired by going to the Capitoline Museum in Rome in January and seeing all these stone sculptures of animals and men, usually with hair and body hair and fur and like lion's manes. And I loved looking at the treatment of this carved fur, carved hair. And this is the fawn. It's from the Roman era, and it's there at the Capitoline Museum. And I love it so much. It's so intricate. Anyway, so I made a series of drawings based on that. And I also noticed this one here too. That is a mosaic, actually. And it's a tiger attacking goat, or some kind of goat creature. And I was really interested in the tiger's lines. So I made a lot of sumi ink drawings based on these kind of furs that I saw. And that came into the Medusa. And then I called it the Medusa painting, if we go back to that painting, the purple one. Yeah. That fed into this painting. And I thought I was going to do a series of all fur paintings, but this is the only one I made.
This one I noticed is significant because it doesn't touch the edges. So whenever you have like a figure like that doesn't touch the edges, that's centered, we tend to read it more symbolically. But then you're combining like this pre-stylized form. And I just want to say, for like, if people get a chance to go to the gallery, like, the craftsmanship on this is like outstanding. And also like how the colors combine. It's very hard to see in the slide, but you're using like a fabric dye or something?
It's an acrylic paint, but it's got dye in it. So it's really it absorbs into the canvas, and then I iron each of the pieces. So it's heat set, and the kind of like heat mixed with the paint, mixed with the canvas, kind of like crushes it. It looks like, can look like velvet or suede. Right. It has a very soft feeling. It's not shiny like acrylic paint usually is.
But also there's a lot of gesture in there that you can't see in the slide. There's like an extraordinary amount of like watercolor type gesture. And then when the watercolor gesture is sewn to like a suture to like the next piece, what you have is this kind of abstract tenebrism, or abstract chiaroscuro between a piece that's a little bit lighter in wash and a piece that's darker in wash. So the culmination of that, the orchestration of that is really extraordinary in this piece. So the color itself kind of mimics the fragmented or stylized gesture in just a wonderful way, a very holistic way.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I think we're like right on schedule here, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we talked about so much. And yeah, we could take questions if there are any.
I think we have some questions. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for that conversation. We do have some audience questions, and if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat, and I'll get to you. I actually wanted to ask a question, if that's okay, before we begin. I was wondering about, in the conversation around chance, the sewing machine as a tool. Do you think of it, besides the element of putting the composition together, do you think of it as a tool that can introduce chance, or like that can reveal your hand in a way? Is it a gesture in your mind?
No, it's not a gesture. It's a practical solution, I would think. Yeah, and the chance comes from the finding of the shapes, surprises, and then it's hard to see, as Tom said, it's hard to see with the digital images, but there's a lot of gesture and brushstroke within the surface of the painting. But no, I really don't. And I also should say that I have help sewing now, and I'm not sewing everything all by myself. I have the most amazing team of assistants and seamstresses that do the hard hard labor of a lot of, like, especially that large Medusa painting. So we do it all together, but it's definitely there's less chance in that side. That's the side that's the more, which is it right brain or left brain, which is the more logical one? Left brain, I think. I think it's the left brain. Yeah, that's the left brain, and then the other side is the chance, the surprise, the instinct.
Great, thanks. I think in our audience, Greg Woolard had some further questions about the actual process. So Greg, I'm going to ask you to turn on your mic if you'd like to ask them.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, hi. I saw the show. I was really impressed with it. And the making of the pieces was, I don't know, not as important to me, but it really stood out. And I was wondering, how do you wrangle those things? Like, they just seem like they're heavy. It's a heavy fabric. You're talking about taking it apart and putting it back together and stretching it, and like, I hate stretching canvas, so I was just wondering, how do you handle the physicality of it? And I also wanted to say, I literally gasped when I saw the big orange piece.
Oh,
just so beautiful.
Thank you. Well, if they're really, really large, they're made in parts. And so the orange and the blue pieces are made on two different panels. So that's one way. I have these very large tables on casters in my studio that can be rolled around. So I have one sewing machine. It's an industrial sewing machine. It's the same type of machine that people use to sew sailcloth. So
Wow.
think of giant sails for a sailboat. So this is the kind of machine that I have. So it's really strong, and I have strong needles. And all of the tables, if I'm working on a really large piece, they get pushed together, and then we have help. I mean, I have help. Someone, me or somebody else is on the sewing machine, and then someone else is holding the fabric behind it, and we kind of like feed it through. And there's a lot of pinning, and there's a lot of organizing and setting up before the sewing actually happens. But it's a process that I've kind of developed over, like 12 years or so now. And I started really small, and these are the largest paintings I've ever made, except for a piece at the Carnegie Museum last year or the year before, which is 23 feet. But that was also made on 5 different panels. So I think you can do anything. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Do it. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Our next question will come from Emily. Oh, and I'll ask you to turn on your mic, Emily.
Hi, thank you, Sarah and Tom, for this conversation. It's been really interesting to learn about your work. I was wondering, what have you learned about painting or your painting practice by creating situations where dancers and performers can interact with your work?
I've learned that I want to do more of that, for sure. And I've learned I've learned that I'm getting more and more impatient with static experiences, the static thing of the painting on the wall in the room. I'm really in the white cube room. I'm really so much more and more interested in creating more environments, and whether it could be a mural or, oh, I should have sent this picture on the slide presentation, but I designed a swimming pool in Mexico for a foundation, which was all different shades of ceramic, terracotta, and lava stone tile. And it was this idea that, you know, I wanted to create an immersive, people use the word immersive all the time in art speak, but I wanted to be literal about it, and that you could literally immerse yourself in the swimming pool, which is a painting, which is another, you know, me coming out of painting and me thinking about different definitions of what painting can be. That was a big meaningful experience. So what have I learned? I've learned that I want to do more for sure. And yeah, I've just sort of like learned what I want, where I want this to take me. Yeah. And different mediums too, you know, as well. You know, I've been painting with canvas and paint for a super long time, pretty long time, but I'm more and more interested in ceramic as a medium. And I'm finding that I'm spending a lot more time down in the ceramic studio, doing pottery and doing sculpture, thinking of glaze a lot, different colors of glazes, and thinking how I can translate that into my work. And I'm not sure how, other than what I've already done. I'm experimenting a lot right now, but we will see.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Next, we have a question from Sarah Goffstein. Sarah, I'm asking you to turn on your mic.
Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to attend today is not only because I'm a big fan of both you and Tom, is I saw your orange and purple works in your current show immediately when the show opened, and they captivated me. And there's a different use of negative space than what I've seen in the past. I found them really powerful, and it was interesting as you were talking, you featured the work with a dancer earlier in the talk, and I was thinking about dance when I saw the purple and orange piece, and it's almost as if the dance is embedded in the work itself now, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you were thinking about those two pieces, because they feel really different from some of your prior work.
The purple and orange pieces that were in the first slide that we looked at, those two, the long orange one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and how I was thinking about making them, because they feel different, you say. Yep.
It feels like dance is embedded within their abstraction, and I was wondering if that's something that resonates with you.
Definitely, it definitely resonates. That's great that you noticed that. I can't say it's something that I was directly thinking about. When I was making this painting, like I was describing the process of making the show and how, you know, kind of one painting leads to the next. And so like I started with a very large purple painting with a Medusa with all the squiggly lines. And then how that generated this pile of negative shapes. And then that pile of negative shapes went into the next one. And then in fact, I had more negative shapes because I had the raw canvas, you know, because it's never white, it's raw canvas that I'm using. And then I had all these shapes that went into the next one. So there really was this kind of jumping from one painting leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, kind of like, what is that thing? Ouroboros, the snake eating the tail, the sort of like self-digesting thing, the painting, the group of paintings that kind of feeds to the next and feeds to the next, and it's endless kind of thing. I didn't make those paintings as designed to be specifically backdrops, but one very large orange one, I don't know if you've seen the Guggenheim Museum. I have an installation at the Guggenheim Museum in the cafe, and I created a tile floor and a tile backdrop, and then also the same scale of a painted backdrop in the back of the restaurant. And I really was thinking of that scale as a great space, as a great way of sort of creating a backdrop for a social space. So I see how that connects to your idea about the dance, but I don't know if that answers your question. But
I'm still
I don't
thinking
know,
about
just-
these works, and it's interesting to have you connect it with the work. Is that the Guggenheim, did you say? I haven't been up to as much since the pandemic, actually.
Yeah,
not.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think the restaurant is open right now, actually, but you can look, if you look in the window, there's these little portholes, you know, the Frank Lloyd Wright built on 88th Street, and you can sort of look in and you can see the backdrop in there if you're walking by.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have a question from Charlie, our managing editor.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Sarah. That was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and seeing the pictures and being reminded of my friend James Hoff. I had to take a break and go find your book that they published, Sarah. I just felt so many things happening. My question goes back to the installation image we looked at of your show at Nacel's place in 2014, where we first saw the tiled floor today. And but what struck me was the way that you positioned the two paintings standing upright at the edge of the tiled floor. And I mean, from my position looking at the backs of them, the back seemed so prominent. The structure of the painting seemed so prominent. I couldn't even see the face of the paintings. So I guess, so my question really came to when you were building those works, and the other pictures I saw didn't really have that setup, so I don't know that it pertains to a later part of your practice. But when you were building those works, I'm curious how you thought about the face versus the rear of the canvas, and how you conceptualized the object as a freestanding thing as opposed to a wall-based presentation.
Yeah, that's the only time I've ever shown the backs of my paintings. I think that's the one and only time. And as I talked about before, I wanted to create a room within a room, an environment within a room. And yeah, you're right. Obviously, I could have built another wall and hung those two paintings on a wall. You wouldn't see the back. But there was something, okay, so I was looking a lot at, there's two things, I guess. The first thing is that I was looking a lot at, talking about going to the museum, MoMA library all the time. And I found a book on display and looking at, I think it was the Salon des Artistes Décoratifs in Paris in the late 1920s. And the designers like Eileen Gray and Sonia Delaunay, they had it was like an art fair, but back in the day. And so they had every designer had their own booth, but they created these kind of mini display rooms within a bigger, like whatever a convention center would have been called in those days. But so you had a raised floor, and you had like maybe some designer had created curtains and they were displaying their new design for a curtain or a kind of wallpaper or something. And there was a very kind of temporary feeling. And I loved the idea of this kind of a room within a room, but a temporary room within a room. Yeah. That's why you see the tile floors being raised and a kind of a lightweight temporary feeling. And I thought that, you know, I like the lightness of having the two paintings sort of like that, and as opposed to the Jorge Pardo idea of tiling the entire room from edge to edge on the floor permanently. It's not that. It's about a temporary, portable, collapsible, portable situation. So that's one thing I was definitely looking at. And then the other thing is I really wanted to show that these are objects. And I hadn't had a lot of experience showing my paintings in public yet. I was still kind of early. This was still early in my career showing in galleries. And so I was really kind of proud of the way that they're made, and kind of like excited to show people, oh yeah, it's not a painting, it's an object, and look at the back. And I loved showing people, like, come around to the back and you can see. And I don't know, I guess that's not very mysterious of me, but I liked the idea of just being like, this is how it's done. You can do it too. Yeah, I think so. That's the answer. Yeah.
It makes so much sense to me, especially thinking about how you described the importance of your body or the viewer's body in relation to the work. And I think making it so physical and making your stitching so apparent is a very pronounced and beautiful compliment to what you did with the floor. I very cool choices, cool moves.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlie. Last but not least, we will go to Fong, our publisher, for a final question. And Fong, I'm asking you to turn on your mic now.
Thanks, Louis. Let me get off the phone first. I'll call you back later. Yes, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation, you guys, Sarah and Tom. I heard early on when you mentioned Jack Youngerman and it was Kelly, I also thought of N.S. Martin. And it's so interesting too, the notion of style, as you mentioned, the Kupler book, Tom, Shape of Time. That was a very important book. And in fact, Art Reinhardt reviewed it for Art News in, I think in the mid 60s. I think that book came out 62, so he might have reviewed it 50, 65, 66, don't remember the exact date. But it's so interesting, the whole notion of style or the notion of limitation biography, was being challenged by placing the history of object and image in a larger continuum, meaning where process of invention, of innovation, where replication and mutation are continuously in conversation through time, simultaneously, And I also thought of the whole, how Matisse, because you mentioned Bather by the River, and of course that's in Chicago Art Institute, but the one at MoMA, the Moroccan, was painted 4 years later. It's so interesting that Matisse was being 11 years older than Picasso. So he had to play catch up with Cubism. Mm-hmm. The source in which abstraction evolved and emerged out of. That's certainly clear with the Russian constructivists when Tatlin brought Malevich to meet Picasso around 1911 or 12. I don't remember exact date, but I think it's about that time. And it's interesting, he instead of going through the analytical phase of Cubism, Matisse tried to explore his own reading of perhaps a little bit of synthetic Cubism, but it's really his own version of plastic form. So he really amplified the use of bold, black line and flatten out the form with greater extent than Picasso ever did. That's, to me, is interesting. But and then I was thinking in how Reinhardt review of Shape of Time in his own work, because Reinhardt always had this denial of how art is art and life is being separate. The two do not cross over, but we love both. Partly because as you go back and remember the famous 12,000 slides, lecture slides that he gave, whether at the club or among friends, to me, that's performative slide lecture. Where the photo he took of extensive travel around the world, showing in quick succession based on the playful formal kind of morphological change of rhythm, mostly arch window. Remember the arch window, and then it's rhymed with doorways, and occasionally you see figure in it. The idea is simply this: everyday living, thinking, moving, walking around. As you mentioned, Ellsworth squat ice cream cone, which we mediate or function tactility. That's what it is. In all aspects. And I think let's just hypothesize that there may be two kinds of abstraction in a way. The so-called aspect of abstraction, one, I call it low abstraction, where we are aware of distinct aspects in the context of with others, and other maybe high abstraction, where we isolate one aspect instead of all of it. So my question a little bit long-winded here, but in terms of the continuum aspect where you embrace, dance, music, so that is audio and sound and movement, then the whole idea of high and low abstraction. So how does that fit in? Does it require a certain kind of I would say critical reception of embracing all of it together? Would it be relevant even without the dancer there doing the dance? And
I tried to be a pure high abstractionist. I tried it for a long time and I was really bad at it. Or
Yeah.
I couldn't turn off the noise. I couldn't turn off, and it's also like being in New York and to be in New York as an artist, you have, at least when I got here, you had to have 5 different jobs, and
Yeah.
and to survive, or to pay the rent. And so you have to do other things. And then later in life, if you want to have a family, your body takes over. Those being pregnant, for example, is it's not high art anymore that you can only think about. You got to think about your body. You got to think about paying the rent. You got to think about so many other things. And for a long time, I was trying to say, okay, this is my practice. This is my life. This is my practice, this is my life. And then I realized, like, why do I have to divide the two? Why can't there be, why do I even have to have that distinction? And that's kind of sad in a way, to be like, I have to be one way or the other way. I can't, that's kind of very old fashioned somehow. And I started, I was telling Tom that one of my great jobs when I first moved to New York in the late 90s was to work at Printed Matter.
Yeah.
And this was a job that I had while I was going to graduate school. And I met so many artists who were walking in there, artists, musicians, performers, art adjacent, all kinds of people, publishers, makers of all sorts. And they were all making books, and we were putting these books in the bookstore, but they all had different, but there were all these different kind of personalities and all different like ways of being artists. And I realized that to be a painter doesn't mean I have to be the hermetic painter in the room being like this. I can allow the world in.
Yeah.
And once I allowed the world in, and I started thinking about dance and sound and performance, and also just, being bored while sitting at the playground or like off to the nightclub to go dancing, all that stuff feeds into your painting, whether you like it or not. And so instead of just like looking at art history and like trying to be critical about, our historical whatever, I began being like, oh, I want to grab that ice cream cone off the floor and look at this. So I began to be like, I can do what Kelly did. I can do whatever I want to do, actually.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one way or the other, is what I'm trying to say. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It does. I mean, it takes a while to adjust your body and your eye. I'm talking about optical as well as bodily response to the work. I remember seeing at Masmoka. Louis and I was discussing like the other day. So there's certain kind of, I would say, determinate, very strongly determined from the outset that the discrepancy among the motif in the floor,
right,
and the painting that you were talking about earlier with Tom. I mean, the dissonance is really make that whole installation so interesting.
Thank you. I think I'm glad that you noticed that, because you see this installation with the tile floor and then the painting, and you see these elegant curves, right? So there's that, but there's also the fact that this little stage and this little wall is in a room that's a bigger room, right? The Masmoka room, which is dirty bricks and old windows and dirty ceiling, or like ducts on the air ducts on the ceiling. There's a kind of a grid and a pattern and a line within the architecture of Masmoka. You look outside the windows and you see trees with leaves. There's another pattern, a natural pattern. Yeah. And so it's really like, by leaving those walls open and the ceiling open and leaving all of that stuff raw, I want you to notice those things too. You don't just notice the painting, you notice what you're standing on, those tiles. You notice the floor, that's wood, that's got stripes, that's a different pattern. You notice that, and you look at the window, you notice the leaves. and so on and so on. And it's sort of what I'm trying to get at is an awareness of, you can look at the painting, but you also are aware of the world around the painting. It's not just the thing, it's everything around it.
Yeah.
And if there's anything I'm trying to get at in my work, it's to slow you down and notice.
Even without that context where it happened to be a certain kind of thoughtful, site-specific installation, like the one at Mass Mocha, rather than the one to show at the gallery now. I think what is surprising too is that, you know, one expect abstraction to be read somewhat uniformly, you know, so that the consistent, you know, carry through to the form or the shape of particular of the artist trying to project. I think a lot of it actually have a very loud present in the work, how they move from one to the next in terms of movement and spatially speaking also. And I think that's what makes the work almost near abject at times. I find it super irritating at times because it requires of my being there longer than I expected. So I have to really see it slowly come back. And so anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Back to you, Louis.
Thanks, Fong. And thank you everyone for your questions. Thanks, Tom and Sarah, for your great conversation. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunches with a poem, and we've carried that forward into these community events. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Aries Kirby, to the stage. Aries Kirby is a being constellation of given human category poet. She has published this, Daisy and Catherine, that, Sonnet Infinitesimal Material Girl, and the third, Daisy and Catherine Squared, forthcoming 2021. She is a candidate for a master's degree at Bard College. Over to you, Aries.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aristilde Kirby. Shout out to the Brooklyn Rail. Shout out to Louis MC on the ones and twos. Shout out Tom. Shout out Fong. Shout out the entire team. Shout out Sarah. Thank you for that amazing explication of your own work. I feel like you have a poet spirit about you, where it's about like sort of amplifying an ontology of presence in your life, and I really appreciate that. It seems like you have a deep reverence for the medium, but also you have the irreverence to knock down some walls and expand what it means. So thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Aristilde Kirby. I will be reading you one mega poem. I made my own poetic form. It's called the Vajra Macrogram. Vajra is a word in Sanskrit that means thunderbolt and diamond at the same time. Somehow it carries both. And and the macrogram is a reference to the microgram by Jorge Carrera Andrade. So yeah, I'm gonna read you a poem that's 15 tiny poems with a 2-line grand finale. Ready? Sick, let's do it. This first one is called Isa Poem, after Kobayashi Isa, the haiku poet of note, and 21 Savage, the Grammy award-winning street rapper of note. 8. Like Isa, brush drawn, she peels a pink lady who tears on her tartan penknife. And and I'm gonna do like a little liner note thing after which ones I feel it's appropriate to do. So yeah, 21 Savage, he has this famous interview where he's sitting on a couch and the interviewer's like, "What's that cross on your forehead?" And he's like, it's a knife, ISSA, it's a knife. And so I thought that sort of crossing of Kobayashi Isa and 21 Savage was really an interesting thing to start a poem based off of. This next one is called Chicago Typewriter. It's number 6, after Resident Evil 4. Carnal machine pun, her cheeks puffed, spitting kernels, to raise C's charnally mood. And this next one is number 14, called Selfie, titled, after Jamie Keeling, who's the bar manager at the restaurant that I work at, or at least I used to work at. Yeah. Purikura in eel tempura, Ice cubed shisa leaves. In tequila, breath on the glass. And this next one is number 3. It's called Agarvati / aroma wound. Agar in Sanskrit means aroma, and vati in Sanskrit means wound or grief. 3. Rain stokes the Catskills. Incense of wispy calms hiss calm on plum vetiver stones. And this next one is number 11. It's called Sandhyabasa Castle in Intentional Twilight. 11. Longing like a Stegner or Modigliani limbs. They lip mugs at the same time. This next one is called Daisy's Pupil. It's number 7. Catherine picks the lashes off of a gay ox eye to see if D caught a feeling. And this next one is called Catherine's Whip. It's number 1. Daisy pulls up in that Diablo 630, ribbon flecked in grave accents. The next one is called Bliss Whirl Albedo, Gasper's Moschino coin purse, after Pig Destroyer. 10. She would die of happiness while tasting the coins of Persephone's phosphines. So yeah, a Gasper is someone who likes to be choked during sex. Yeah. And so the next one, number 5, is Bliss Whirl Rubido, Devilish Dervish Deva, Physalis Alkengi Vajra Yogini. Number 5. Her lantern winter cherry top spins ripples like a dancer on the world's grief. Vajra Yogini, in my room, you can see this thing in the background. So in Vajrayana Buddhism, there's a sort of goddess sort of figure named Vajra Yogini. She's totally nude. She has like this necklace of skulls and skeletons. And she's known as a dancer upon the world's grief. She's known as someone who emanates a naked wisdom for degenerate times, which we live in. And so the next one is called Bliss Whirl Nigredo, Sweet Asteroids in Winter, after Geneva Skeen and Clarice Lispector. 2. Black licorice jelly beans, she hearts as a favorite bead to count each lucent breath. And the next one is called Dimension Door, the task of the translator, after Akiko Yosano and Star Ocean to the End of Time. 15. Sunlit picnic on the mountain. A mantis trims the wind's bangs by a shrine. Split and spread. Red. This next one, Dimension Door. Right. So I don't know. I was thinking about, in Star Ocean to the End of Time, there's a character. His name is Fate Line God. He wields a sword. He has a special move called Dimension Door. And that sort of kind of helped move my sort of perception on like, what can a translator, what's their duty? They're supposed to create this impossible door between two languages, between two worlds, essentially. So yeah, and Akiko Yosano, she was a Japanese poet who made this great, she's known for this book called Tango Hair. And I was thinking about a mantis like cutting someone's bangs. And the next one is called Paysage, after Charles Baudelaire in The Weekend. Number 9. She cries on the 6 train to Alphabet City because of a Baudelaire poem. And this is a very autobiographical poem after Charles Baudelaire in The Weekend. I was actually reading a landscape, also known as Paysage in French, by Baudelaire. And then I heard the Weekend song, Save Your Tears, at the same time. And the whole thing about Paysage is that it's about like, with all of the misery that seems indigent to life as we know it and all the suffering, that, through his poetry, he's going to make a place where his mind has a sort of site of rest and relaxation and beauty. So that's what I think about in regards to my poetry. Save your tears for another day, as The Weekend says. And the next one is called Emotional Landscapes, after Bjork in TM 13, 10, 3, yeah. And they ride in each other's cars, stereo blasting Bjork, talking mess or dissolving scars. And the next one is called Coping Saw Koan. Daisy's meditation under National Grid Tower with ambient environmental destruction. 4. Ponder, new dew downpour, or wire static as a Husqvarna splits the distance. And the last one of the tiny poems is called Vacancy Project after Meme Bersenbrugge, Masami Hosono, and Shaheen Qureshi. 12. Her mullet, 3D blonded in the front, 4D black locks gliss flax in the back. And yeah, like a few weeks ago, I saw Meme Bersenbrugge and Simone White read at the Poetry Project, and Meme just had like this amazing line about like someone's person being 3D in the front, but 4-dimensional in the back. And I was just like, wow. So, and Vacancy Project is a queer hair cuttery in the city, led by Masami Hosono and Shaheen Qureshi. Shout out to her for reminding me that that Zoom was happening at the time. It's important for us to assemble in whatever way we can these days. And here's the grand finale. You ready? Good. This is Daisy and Catherine. Daisy pulls up in that black licorice jelly bean rain, stokes the Catskills like a Diablo 630. Ribbon she hearts as a favorite bead incense, of wispy calms hiss calm, flecked in grave accents, to count each lucent breath on plum vetiver stones. Ponder, new dew downpour, or her lantern winter cherry, carnal machine pun, her cheeks wire static, as a top spins ripples, puffed like puffed spitting kernels. Husqvarna splits the distance, a dancer on the world's grief, to raise sea's charnely mood. Catherine picks the lashes. Like Issa, brush drawn, she cries on the 6 train off of a gay oxide to see she peels a pink lady who tears. To Alphabet City, because if Dee caught a feeling on her tartan penknife of a Baudelaire poem, she would die of happiness, longing like a Stegner, or her mullet, 3D blonded, while tasting the coin's Modigliani limbs in the front, 4D of Persephone's phosphines. They lip mugs at the same time, black locks gliss flax in the back. And they ride in each other's cars, purikura and eel tempura, sunlit picnic on the mountain, stereo blasting Bjork, ice-cubed shiso leaves. A mantis trims the winds talking mess or dissolving scars. In tequila, breath on the glass, bangs by a shrine, split ends spread, reed. Nadeshko pinks bloom carnal, behind and before Kushiti Gurba, says we're a big hit, like a big bounty or a song going diamond. You're in my head. Take the goddamn shot already. Steady and not right now. And that's that. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for sticking around. Shout out to YouTube. Whoa, I'm in 320, 420, 720p. Take care of each other. 2021. Let's keep doing that.
Thank you so much, Aries. That was amazing. Lightning and diamonds together. And thank you to Sarah and Tom. What a wonderful conversation. Thanks everyone for tuning in today and for your questions. Before we leave, I'd like to say that October marked the Rail's 20th anniversary and we'll be celebrating all the way through this year. Please consider making a year-end contribution to keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent, like these NSE Lunchtime series and We the Immigrants Project. Every amount matters to us, and our goal is to double last year's participation to reach 500 donors. Check out the chat for more information or ask someone on our team. And please join us Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Mira Shore and Charlotte Kent. We'll conclude with a poetry reading on Monday from Rachel Blau Duplessis. I'll now give everyone the ability to turn on their mics and say goodbye, hello, and thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to say real quick that I'm on Mohican land in Hudson, New York. Yeah, he colonized the world. Thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Aris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Tom. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks,
Great
Tom.
reading, Aris. Really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
good.